Hi. Have you ever noticed how, whenever you think of someone, then relate to that person, that in your mind you have a sort of version of them, like a mental image of them with memories and things like that about them that you refer to mentally whenever you speak to them or think of them? And have you ever noticed how this image that you have of them, this version of them, is not the same as anyone else's version of that person? So it's like if you have a friend whose name is Caroline and your name is Anne, then you, Anne, have a version of Caroline. So it's like Anne's Caroline exists in your mind, in your consciousness. And if you have another friend called Jane, and Jane knows Caroline, then Jane also has a version of Caroline in her mind. Jane's Caroline. And so how many Carolines are there really in consciousness? How many of us are there in consciousness? Like, does the way your father sees you, is that the same as the way your mother sees you? When your father thinks of you, are they having the same thoughts and emotions and perspectives about you that your mom is? And the same applies to everyone who you relate with. All of us internally are walking around in our own consciousness with a sort of version of everyone else and our own version of reality and our own version of who we think people are. Isn't that sort of interesting? And when you really understand this, or when you think about it more and consider it in the context of your life, it takes you down some really interesting discoveries. So I invite you to start to reflect on this, to introspect on it. One of the discoveries it can take you towards is that whenever you're having a situation in a relationship that's difficult, that actually that situation is kind of based on whatever version you have of that person and whatever's happening in the relationship. And on the other end, whoever you're in relationship with, they might be experiencing something totally different. So in a way, you might be worried and stressed about something that they're not even thinking is going on. So this is sort of a process of humility. It's part of the process of realizing that the things that we assume and think and the story that we tell ourselves about what is reality and what is going on in our relationships, in our life, in our careers, that those aren't really true in any sense, that they're just something that we're imagining and believing and assuming to be true. And why is that so important? Well, from the vantage point of helping you become more conscious, basically it's helping you step out of unconsciousness. Unconsciousness being imagining things that are happening that aren't. So if we're imagining that like these bad things are happening or things aren't going well, then we start to like actually feel that way. Because when we imagine something, our body and subconscious mind sort of releases the chemicals that create the emotions that then we feel, the stress and anxiety. And so what happens when the things that we're imagining that are scary and bad, when those aren't actually what is, when they're not what's really happening? Well, then that means that we're having all of this suffering. We're experiencing all of this suffering for no reason. And from the vantage point of consciousness, actually, it's quite possible and true that all of our suffering is in a way unnecessary, because it's all based on an imagining and an interpretation and a process of assumption and projection onto reality. Now, that's not at all to invalidate or diminish in any way whatever suffering anyone is going through or any pain anyone has experienced. It's not meant to do that. Actually, it's meant to help you free yourself from that, because whatever pain you're experiencing or stress, you might be projecting that death is bad and scary. You might be projecting that someone you're in relationship with is upset with you or misunderstood you. You might be projecting that your career and financial situation is not optimal right now. You might be projecting that you're never going to meet that loved one or your partner or your soulmate. And of course, these projections create those chemical reactions in us, and then we feel that way. So what this does is actually it offers you a way out, so that in this very next moment, this very next second, with your very next breath, you can breathe into a whole new world, a whole new reality, if you can really focus your consciousness, your free will power, your intentional power of choice into stepping into a new world, into basically a world of complete humility, where you realize that you don't know what's going on, and you sort of surrender into the unknown. And this is a really effective and a necessary part of becoming more conscious, transforming, and manifestation and healing. Because a lot of what prevents us from healing, a lot of dis-ease, energetically speaking, is caused by us holding on to mentally or in our bodies and subconsciously these very painful stories of either past experiences or very intense fears or beliefs about ourselves. And we hold these sort of thoughts and perspectives in our cells, in our cellular memory, all throughout our body. And it causes dysfunction in certain areas of our body, and it imbalances our system, creates disharmony, dis-ease, and then we suffer those then imbalances. So same thing with like the process of not illness, but what was it? So it's the similar thing with the process of like manifesting. And if you're trying to change something in your life, to heal, to attain some financial or career goal, or find a relationship you really want, and it's not happening, usually that's because the world, and the people that make up the world, and the things that make up that world that we are sort of generating in our consciousness aren't really matching up, aren't really in alignment, aren't really supportive of the actions and decisions and approach that would ideally lead to the result that we want. So that sounded a little complicated. I want to simplify it. So you have a version in your mind of everybody you're in a relationship with. That version, your version of your friend Annie, your version of your friend John, your version of your friend Tom, is made up of your recorded, remembered interpretations of your experiences with them. Interpretations. So it's not fact, right? Your memories are not fact. They're interpretations of the past experience. And so then that makes up your version of John, but it also makes up your version of a lot of other things, like your version of your 20th birthday party, your version of how you feel about your work, and what you think about and feel and see your work as. Your version of yourself, right? So like Anne, like who does Anne think she is? And when she thinks of herself, what kind of person does she see? When she looks in the mirror, what kind of person does she see, with what strengths and what weaknesses and what capacities for change and what capacities for healing but the potentials in relationship. And so you see this all of these, everything that we sort of interact with, we sort of have a version of in our consciousness. And that makes up our world, the world we live in, the world that we live in, which you might call our individual, like, reality bubble or ego bubble. And so when that world is not in alignment with what we want, then it's not supporting us getting what we want. And for example, the world might believe we can never heal, right? In our mind, we might think about our healing and think it can never happen. And so how hard is it going to be to heal, right? If we have that in our consciousness. In our mind, we might think we'll never find a great relationship. So who are we going to see when we go on that date? We're going to see someone who would, for some reason, never work out for us. And so, and then when we think of a relationship that we want to work but have had difficulty with, we might see the person as either selfish or uncaring or too afraid or angry, and yet we want the relationship to work, and at the same time we're carrying this version of them that if we don't change that version of them, then the relationship could never work. And then this brings up a very interesting, like, chicken or egg dynamic, which touches a little bit on quantum physics and some other very interesting things. Like, for example, if you are operating in a relationship with someone and assuming them, and some part of you, like, is seeing them as selfish and uncaring, and you're, like, interacting with them or living with them with that version of them in your mind, and that you're projecting that version of them onto them when you're interacting with them, then of course it's going to affect the way that you talk to them and the way you approach them and the things you say and the things you do. And that's the thing about, like, energy. When you approach a situation with an assumption, you tend to energize that assumption. Because if you're giving attention to the idea that this person is selfish and uncaring, you're then going to act like this person is selfish and uncaring, and that's going to lead to results that appear to be evidence of that person being selfish and uncaring. For example, if someone looks at their bank account and sees, like, no money or not enough money, then they're going to walk around feeling like, I have no money, I don't have enough money. Then they're going to make decisions and choices that reflect that feeling and belief. I have no money, I don't have enough money. And then sooner or later, they're not going to have enough money, because that it is that idea, that belief, that's driving their decisions. And beliefs tend to be self-manifesting. What you hold in your consciousness tends to be self-manifesting. And if you think about it like this, and by the way, if you're holding that in your consciousness, you're going to interpret life events, like a mail from the bank, as, oh my God, this is bad news, right? I'm not going to have money after this letter's going to say something about me not having enough money. And you're going to interpret text messages from that other person who you felt was selfish and uncaring as, oh, look at them being selfish and uncaring again, even when they might not be being that way, even when the bank is sending you good news. So you see how what we hold in our consciousness, the assumptions we make, they bias all of the interpretations we make. And then that in turn affects the decisions and the things we say and do, the energy we put out into the world, and that in turn affects our results. And that's the cycle. And there's a good diagram of this cycle in a book called The World Without Fear by John Jones, who was our spiritual teacher for many years. And it's called, like, the belief-based reality creation cycle. Because our beliefs and what we hold in our consciousness does tend to create our experience of reality. If you want to build a table, what do you first do? You imagine the table, what it's going to look like and what it's going to be made of. And next thing you know, you're building that table and bringing it into the physical world. So I hope you see how freeing this information can be, this understanding can be, if you really dwell on it, introspect on it, reflect on it, apply it to your different life experiences. Let this seep into your consciousness. Receive this and start to ask yourself, start to question the different, the version of reality that you have, the version of whatever you're projecting onto what you think your relationships are, what you think your work is, what you think your life means, who you think you are. And here's the gold in this video, the treasure, is that what is consciousness really? What is consciousness really? And how do we find inner peace in consciousness? The inner peace is had when there are no more projections, when there are no more imaginings, when there are no more versions of other people in our minds, all these versions of what life is, versions of what our career is, versions of who we are. When we're not carrying all these thought forms that then trigger all these chemicals into our bodies as our bodies responds in preparation for fight or flight and things like that, and we feel stressed and anxious. If you clear your mind so that there are no thought forms, and so that your mind is empty, and your consciousness is not taking the form of anything, then there's deep, deep, expansive inner peace, complete inner peace. And from there, once there's that inner peace, that opens a door, you go through that door, then you can see what is. There is consciousness. Consciousness cannot be, defined, described, put into words. You can be guided there. We can point to it. And this is one way to point to it. And of course, this requires releasing fears. It's scary to do this, to let go of everything that we think is happening. Because we become so identified and attached to that. And in a way, the stories we create are like a part of our self-defense and safety strategies and control strategies in life. So this is sort of, in order to be conscious, in order to experience true inner peace, we must let go of all strategies, all control strategies, all safety strategies, all agendas. And that's kind of what thought forms are. So I hope that this has been really helpful, and I hope that it is as interesting to you as it is to Alessandrina and I. Please let us know how this helps you, or how you're processing this, and what you're learning, because we'd love to hear from you. And I hope that you enjoy this video. And if you'd like help, if you'd like facilitation, if you'd like to receive some life coaching to help you to facilitate your evolution of your consciousness in your life, please do book a session on our website with us, a private session with either Alessandrina or myself. And thank you, and I hope you have a great day.